we've now got something different again, and it's really looking at the question of how organisations. We talked about organisations identifying customers and verifying them and making sure they're not going to get defrauded. But how do organisations protect themselves from fraudulent suppliers and partners? And so the area of identification of commercial bodies is obviously extremely important. And fortunately, we have John Bruner with us here today from Aegis Mobile, and this is what he does for a living. And so for the next half an hour or so, we're going to be finding out more about that. So I'm going to walk over and join him. We're going to have a chat, and then hopefully we'll have some questions from the floor as well. So everyone applaud. Lovely. So thanks for joining us. I am now.
Are we both on?
Yeah. I'm shouting anyway, so you can all hear me. So yeah, why don't you just tell us first of all about the nature of your business, so we can get a sense of that, and then we can dive further into it.
Sure. Well, let's start. So Aegis has been around for about 16 years now, and we started in what we call the brand protection and compliance industry. We started with the telecom industry with premium SMS, providing protective services, if you will, to protect consumers from bad merchants. We wound up developing this life cycle capability that really fed itself from a continuing improvement perspective by realizing that the true way to protect consumers is, number one, to know who is touching the carrier's customers, so who is the merchant. Number two is to know what is the program that they're going to run on the network, so onboarding the program as well and verifying it's fully compliant prior to launch. Number three, things change, so you need to go out and be secret shoppers and engage product live so you can get the consumer experience. Number four, transaction data doesn't lie, and so evaluating all of the data from revenue information, transactions at the transaction level, refunds, complaints, analyzing all that data as a business results, all then turns around and feeds back into who's the merchant that's providing services, what services are they providing. So the risk analysis was a continuing circular, closed loop, continuous improvement process.
Okay, so you're helping big organizations to ensure that they trust the companies they're working with. In the telco space, you just kind of touched on it there. Where are there's been a big surge in the need to identify third parties, and I think it's come from things like direct carrier billing relationships and so on. So can you tell us a little bit more about what's causing the growth of this need to identify third parties and which verticals they're coming from?
Sure. I mean, the markets that we operate in, which is really the US, Canada, and Australia, are driven by regulators, predominantly in terms of making sure that consumers are being protected. Starting with premium SMS back in the day, which was a $3 billion industry in the US market, the whole thing came down because of fraud. It went away. It's a large market to collapse. But there are many different services that the carriers offer. There's identity platforms, there's direct carrier billing, there's RCS, there's A2P messaging, there's location services. And all of those involve third-party merchants engaging customers directly. And so, oftentimes they're holding either personal information like location or identity, or they're holding location, where are they? Can somebody actually be tracking, their boyfriend without their knowledge or consent to have their phone number tracked? So there's a lot of different telecom areas that have been exposed to significant regulatory impact for not doing enough to protect consumers. And so it's been very good for our industry to get in and figure out ways to create these continuous improvement compliance processes.
So just so I understand this correctly, you've got big telcos and MNOs, and they are working with aggregators, and these aggregators are suddenly working with more and more SMEs and brands to provide premium SMS services, direct carrier billings, and so on. So that means that there's a huge number of new organizations coming into the space, and the MNOs and their aggregators clearly have to trust that these third parties are trustworthy.
Right.
That's right, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, so give us an insight into how, the ways in which you verify them, the data sources that you check them against?
So interestingly, in the US market, they recently came out with verified sender for business to consumer messaging. And the carriers are basically, they've launched 10DLC, which is enabling long codes for business to consumer text messaging. And we're partnering with a company called the Campaign Registry, of which my friend Tor is in the audience here. But they're a front end to the Twilios and Cinches that I know are in the room, plus many other CPaaS providers, to onboard hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of brands that will be essentially enabling long codes to talk to their constituents, their customers, and whomever else they're messaging to. And so we were asked about 2 years ago, to develop an automated high-volume verification platform that would not only do identity verification of businesses, but to also do a background check on those businesses. So financial embarrassment, legal issues, criminal issues, international sanctions, watch lists, and other AML type bad actions. So basically a behavioral look at the history of a company. And what's interesting is they've developed a methodology by which, based on the risk score that you get as a brand, that will determine the throughput of messaging volume that you can do with your customers in the market. And our algorithms are essentially calculating that risk score. Now, what's critically important, though, is that I'm not the one taking the risk. It's the telecom brands. It's the carriers in the U.S. market that take the risk. They've been fined by regulators hundreds of millions of dollars for bad players in the market in the past. And so we work with their legal teams to define right down to the action, how old it is, were they a defendant, how was it settled, to how does that action impact the score. And there are tens of thousands of types of activities that we're looking at to create these scores. So it's really kind of a neat market because it's literally driving a verified sender, so that consumers can have confidence. And as we all know, messaging is in the omni-channel of communicating with customers is a high-value channel for businesses.
So take us into the platform then. So aggregators wants to check, the MNO wants to check this new company that they're working with, and they go into your platform. How many sources can they check against? What kind of sources are they?
So we call the platform AIMS. It's the Aegis Identity and Integrity Investigation Management System. So it's AI to the third power MS. And we do use some AI in the platform. But the platform, what we realized, and you brought up a critical point, is different channels have different risk tolerances. Different brands that we work for as telecom companies have different risk tolerances. So number one, you have to be able to configure the data sources that you're going to call to do the analysis of a customer or of a brand that's registering to do messaging. But you also have to configure the risk score depending on the channel that you're operating through. So for us, when the first thing we do when a brand is presented to us in this channel by TCR is we do an identity analysis. Is this company legally registered in the country it says it's from, and is it in good standing in that country? And so that's just a flat-out identity. Do they exist? Do we have information on a real company? Do we have a VAT tax ID that matches the actual company and the address and the URL and all that good stuff? And we'll check a dozen data sources depending on what country it's coming from to do this analysis of, is this a real company? We can go further than that. We can use external. Andrew's not here. We can do external sources that will also then contact and verify, a person at the company. We can also take government IDs and verify the person that's submitting this business record, all part of the identity analysis and setting up a valid business record that we have now traced back to a company for messaging. Now, the thought is that if you're not a Fortune 500 or a Russell 3000 or basically one of the largest companies in the world, which we know those companies are not out there to do spam and phishing and harm customers, they have better ways to make money. But if you're a mid-sized company or a small company, a background check becomes relevant for you to have any kind of messaging volume. And a background check could be that you're a brand new company and there's not much more that can be done other than validating you exist as a real company and you're legally registered. On the other hand, you could have been around for 37 years and there is a history and you have legal matters. You might even have a few criminal activities out there and you might have some regulatory or financial embarrassment and tax liens and other things. And the question becomes, are any of those relevant to spam and phishing? And so we can check anywhere, depending if we're doing international sanctions and watch lists, we're checking 80 data sources. on the back end of our platform. Now, we're not housing all this data internally, right? So it's you come in, we get data, and then we go out the back end based on the specific type of verification you're requesting, and we source the data sources that we need to come back and do the analysis and push a risk score back out. And for a deep vet, that takes about 10 seconds on average. We've done as many as almost 20,000 companies in a day through this platform, fully automated.
Does this system disadvantage new companies because they don't have, beyond the company registration that you just mentioned, they don't have a lot of proof that they are trustworthy?
No. It's interesting because historically, in the premium SMS days, the reason that we started vetting is that companies would do things to stay below the thresholds and commit fraud. So what they'd wind up doing is either playing whack-a-mole, where you'd shut them down from having access to the network. They'd go get their brother, sister's cousin to start up a company, and they come in and register on Monday, and we're like, wait a minute, we just shut these guys down last week. They've just got a new company, and they put a relative in as a CEO. We can't let them in. And so developing relational data structures to prevent whack-a-mole from happening was one thing, but the other was there was a specific company out there that had developed 121 businesses, and they were literally cramming $5 to $10 charges on 2 million phones per month and making $20 million a month in fraudulent revenue by spreading out the fraud across all these companies. And so being able to do that analysis and link companies together and then look at their behavior in market as a whole was how we were able to catch them, shut them down, and actually work with 2 of the states in the United States to take that company down with the evidence that we had put together. So you do this data crunching, and then you end up issuing a risk score or whatever you call it. That presumably is some kind of digital credential, is it? How do you disseminate that back to the company that needs to know how trustworthy an organization is? I also realize you're also saying disadvantage to small companies. So there's a reason that we're looking at small companies, because there's risk. We don't know anything about you. But the other trick is getting feedback from the market, so that the feedback from the market says they are running all good messaging. They've been doing it for a year. We can move them to a higher throughput. So there's also a trust but verify model there.
Yeah.
Sorry, I realized I didn't answer that question.
So yeah, I was just asking about the risk score and whether you issue some kind of credential, presumably.
So from our perspective, the risk score has got to be defined by the brand that's taking the risk. So it's got to be configurable to what the carriers want to evaluate as high risk. And so what we are doing is not only providing the risk score, but we're providing key indicators back through our API to either the campaign registry or Twilio or Cinch, some of those companies that are hooked up directly to us for this space, that describes what are the types of incidents that were found. Is it years in business? Is it company size? Is it the fact that they said they were a nonprofit and they're not a nonprofit? Is it that they have legal actions that are relevant to consumer fraud? In RCS, it could be the logo that they've submitted is not actually owned by them. It's owned by somebody else, and they have not given attestations to rights to use that logo. So we do provide summary information back, and then we also have the ability for brands to protest and ask for a deeper dive. But we also, the thing is that no automated verification platform is 100% perfect, and so you have to have a waterfall approach. Our goal is to stay above the 95% fully automated as long as we're getting good data. And then complex companies are going to be mostly automated and then be pushed out to analysts that have been doing background checks for 15 years to kind of complete it, update it in the system, and push it out with details. But like I said, we have an open process where you can actually complain and get more feedback if you want it, but we also have what's called an enhanced background check. If somebody doesn't like the score and there's nothing we can do about it, we can actually have investigators search all over the world and do a complete report on that company to further justify what that score might be.
So your scoring is transparent on both sides, so it's not like a lot of situations where a company finds it's blocked and it doesn't know why.
That's not right. It should be transparent.
And do you detail your methodology as well, or do you just say this is your score and then it's up to them to accept or reject it?
So we're doing our best to communicate through the various channels so that brands can become more educated. I'll be honest, it's been slow because nobody wants to take the time to look at the details. I mean, we're talking about, criminal matters, legal matters, regulatory matters, financial matters, international, matters. And there are thousands and thousands of actions that could be found on a company, and they're all weighted and measured and based on how old it is and how big the company is that it's behind, and were they a defendant or not a defendant, or were they a third-party defendant, all of that, it gets very complex. It's all in the system. But we're still trying to kind of aggregate up and say, okay, this is generally it, so that we're communicating it, and also continue to provide materials to the CPaaS providers that helps them train their customers. I was just talking with Cinch about this at the break.
I hope you did a deal with them. No pressure, Lee.
There you guys are already hooked up. We're working with you.
So this is US only at the moment, is that correct?
So that's US only. I mean, we operate internationally, and we've actually, through the automated platform that we launched about 18 months ago, we've done successfully 169 plus countries.
Right.
So it's been very successful so far. We're hoping to test all 230 countries. Data in certain countries is just not great, but as long as we can get whatever data exists in every country that is available, then we'll consider that success.
What is in the case that, will you be honest enough to describe a case where you've given a company a good risk score and they've turned out to not be trustworthy? Has that happened?
So that's the issue, right? When you're doing a verification, it's a point of time. And companies get acquired, companies get new CEOs. And so, if you really want to do the right verification, you're not only looking at the company, you're looking at all related companies, you're looking at all the key employees of the company, which is something we're capable of doing. But you're also continually monitoring that company. So we actually have a product line where we can actually run, every month, a reanalysis of that company. And so if there's a key ownership change, or there's a key employee change, or there's a financial embarrassment that pops up, some of those can be, bankruptcy is a leading indicator of Breaking Bad sometimes, right? So you got a company that's been good, that all of a sudden has incentive to do something to make more money that might not be what you want. So we have the ability to program in continuous monitoring. Most carriers do at least an annual renewal, a verification of the company, and it's, details behind it. So that's the best we can do now. But as I said, this is one product. You need to be monitoring the actual market experience, right? You need to know what's running in your market. You need to be monitoring it from a consumer perspective, and you need to look at the business results to indicate, because you can miss something all the way through there, but the results won't lie. And then you can target in on, exactly what you need to target.
So has anyone, been taken to court that you've said, no, this is a good company?
We haven't had that problem yet. Typically, what we're doing is finding companies that need to be removed, and then the carrier that we're working for is not mentioned in the public, media as being a part of the problem.
And where's the growth coming from at the moment? So we talked earlier about CPaaS and, things like rich messaging and bots. Are you seeing any growth in applications from companies who are trying to get into those spaces?
I'm not sure. I'm a little.
Well, when the aggregators are working, trying to develop new markets, I'm just wondering where they're coming from.
So we were talking to folks about toll-free numbers.
Yeah.
Right, because you're releasing toll-free numbers. Stir Shaken is another environment that they're doing I think more like phone number, behavioral analysis. I would like to do the true, company analysis, so we're trying there. But the reality is, from our perspective, supply chain anywhere. So, for example, IoT partners are preferred partner programs for carriers where they are actually taking product of a brand and reselling it to their own enterprise customers. We're doing verification in those spaces of those brands because, a big carrier does not want to resell a product of a company that's got, bad things in its behavior, if you will, historically. So, really for us, it's supply chain, it's vendor management, it's KYC, and so we see the sky as the limit. In terms of the future, we're also engaged with Glyph, which Michael brought up earlier, with the virtual wallet, and our job is to put credentials into that virtual wallet. So, from a carrier's perspective, are you authorized to do RCS? Are you authorized to do direct carrier billing? Are you authorized to do A2P messaging? Are you authorized, you know what I'm saying? And all of those actually have different risk indicators in the market, which means we're looking for different things in their backgrounds for what credentials we put into that wallet. So to us, the sky is the limit. I would like to see in the future, with the opening of the internet from a COVID perspective and everything else, that merchants are branded as verified wherever you're shopping on the internet, right? I think that's where we want to go. And the other thing I'll tell you is we've done some of this in Canada where we have the Aegis certified credential and we control it. So every time you log into a site or go into a mobile app or anything else, our credential shows up, says Aegis certified. But if we are running, the daily or weekly or monthly updates and we find something with that company that should revoke that credential, we control it. And so it'll no longer pop up, when you go to that website or that, site and all that. So it's, I see a big future in this space.
When we talked last week briefly ahead of this prep, and we talked about, I asked you if you could provide an actual example of a company being verified, and you did CTIA because they're public organisations. So I don't know, for the audience, you could just walk us through, the nature of their application, how you tested them, just so that everyone can get really good insight into how it actually works.
Sure. Yeah, so CTIA is actually a nonprofit in the United States. It's the Cellular Telecommunications Industry Association. And so I had showed, I'm sorry I can't open it up, but without an NDA, I don't open up the insides of the workings. But anyway, so we did go through it, and I showed him that, the first step was actually verifying all of the information about CTIA itself. Is it truly a legally registered nonprofit? Do I have the appropriate tax ID? Do I have all the appropriate information about who they are from an address and a URL and all that good stuff? And so that's the identity analysis up front. But then we did the background check, and of course, there's some tax liens and there's legal matters, but the legal matters that were pulled back were employee injury, things like that, which are completely relevant, so no impact there. No international sanctions. They're not a Fortune 500, Russell 3000. We did get all of the information on their size and how much money they raise every year, and how many years they've been in business and how big they are and all that good stuff. And then in addition, we have customized databases that we've developed over the last 16 years of chasing bad actors that we're running matches against. So have we seen this CEO before? Have we seen this company before? And we have characteristics, because historically we used to link people, companies based on bank account. You come in as a new company, it's like, wait a minute, how do you have the same banking account as a company we just shut down last week? So we have this bad guy database, if you will, of millions of players that we're also matching against. They didn't match against that, obviously. And then in addition, the carriers are giving us their what's called severity 0 players, and these are players that have committed significant spam or phishing acts and been shut down on the carriers' networks. And so they give us information about those companies, but then we build out data on those companies as well, and they didn't match any of those companies. But bottom line is we checked about 45 data sources to do the complete background check and vetting of CTIA. And they came out with a score of 90. And I can tell you the reason they came out with a score of 90, which is a very high score, is that they're not a Fortune 500 or a Russell 3000. And the carriers said the only companies that can get a 100 are Fortune 500 and Russell 3000s. Everybody else starts at 90.
So is 90 a good score then?
90 is a very good score. I'll tell you, the funny thing is you can get a score of 16 and still get throughput, and it has nothing. People look at it and say, what am I, an F student? And that's not what it's really meant to be. So we've tried to figure out how do you really come up with a score that people aren't going to freak out that they got a 16. If you're a small, sole proprietor, doing, 10 messages a day, 16 is fine, from a volume perspective. Is it 16
because you've got so few attributes that you can?
That's about as low as you can go, and
right.
It's because there's nothing available other than that they're legally registered.
How does the MNO know that it's 16 because you're a small company and there's not many things you can test against, rather than there's 100 things, but only 16 of them you got through?
So we send back indicators that indicate exactly why the score is what it is.
Right.
And we also send back, other things that we're doing in the U.S. is political candidates that want to do, messaging to their constituents. That's just a verification of yes or no. Are they legally registered at the local level, at the federal level, or at the state level? There's no score there, right? But it's a yes or no, and if they are, then they can do messaging and they get special rates and all that other stuff. So, number one, we try to communicate details about the score, but the other important thing is the score is very configurable based on what our customers' needs are and risk tolerances are.
Right. You haven't scored Donald Trump then? It'd be tremendously high score,
Yeah,
wouldn't it?
I'm sitting on a camera and you're asking me that question.
Have we got any questions from the audience? I think we've got 5 more minutes before we move on to the next. Anything from online, Daria?
Yes, the online crowd is pretty active throughout, and I like that. If you are from Europe, it sounds a bit like the Eurovision Song Contest. You know, I've got Singapore now, waking up, and I love it. Anyway, nobody got Neil Point today. That's a good thing. The question that I've got here is an interesting one. It's, do you apply the concept of portability, meaning can an agent use somebody else's identity? Does that make sense?
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah, so it's interesting. It depends on the requirements of the customer. If the customer is fine with that, then we're fine with that. So if carriers are fine with that. So I believe that within the US market today for this A2P messaging, that you have companies, for example, that make software for car dealerships. Where's our Volvo friend? For car dealerships. And so from that software platform, there's a CRM and a text messaging capability that's going to customers. And so what we see is agents submitting hundreds and thousands of car companies that they represent nationally. What we're doing from an identity perspective is making sure that we have a valid business record for that actual car dealership. And that means that that agent has worked with the car dealership to get it. Now, in other instances, we may actually send some communication directly to the car dealership and say, you know, please authenticate with a QR code, and then they get a PIN and all that good stuff, right? But yes, if the customer allows it, that's an example that I've seen.
One more question that's occurred to me. So you talked about rolling out your platform to other countries. What systems are companies in other countries using at the moment that, you know, might not be working for them, which is why they're investigating yours? How do companies verify their suppliers at the moment if they're not using a system like yours?
I would argue a lot of companies use something like a Dun & Bradstreet.
Right.
Which is a great source of global information, but there are hundreds, thousands of other sources if you really, really want to get details on the company. But, you know, this system, like I said, creates, well, number one, sometimes when you type something into a global data source, you'll get back 62, results, and you have to pick the right one. You know, our algorithms are designed to figure out which the right one is. And then number two, like I said, there's a lot of data you have to actually go to directly to sources on a global basis. So hence, depending on the country that you're coming from, that also determines the data sources that we have to go to.
So how can you get around a more traditional system like a Dun & Bradstreet system if you're a dubious company?
How do you get around?
How does it produce bad results compared to yours?
It's not bad results. It's a question of coverage for everything that a customer needs from us. And then number two, it's a question of sometimes picking the right return because they won't be able to pick the exact return. And there are many global business sources that provide those services. To us, they are one of many data sources because the requirements are placed on us. Most supply chains that are using these kinds of sources have people doing it manually and running a report. The second thing is that our analysis is completely configurable. So the output is defined by the market, it's defined by the customer. Most of these data services that we use have a standard configured output.
Okay, so finally, what's your roadmap for the next few years? Where do you see the growth coming from and how you're expanding the platform?
So for me, it's talking to some of the major, over-the-top providers as well. And we've been engaging some of those, and then some of your major internet search, companies as well are doing things. I think from this audience, RCS is the up and coming. And RCS is really a broader verification than just an identity check of a company and a background check of a company, because then we have to also verify the chatbot, And depending on the use case of the chatbot, we may have to do other things in the background check, because if there's private data, we're going to look for privacy breaches and things like that as an example. We also, there's logos and a very, a rich experience, if you will. Does the brand that's registering for that chatbot have rights to use that logo? Smaller companies that have never registered their logo, I've got to find some sort of proof that the market has accepted that as their logo versus, is it Joe's Coffee using something that looks like Starbucks logo? Those are things that make the verification much more complex. Now, our platform today does bring back all registered logos that are known, and of course, there are tools out there that Google offers and things like that, for logo analysis. But RCS is a much broader verification. We're currently launching with Verizon doing as a verification authority for that. But it's a pretty complex. I mean, you may have payments transpiring across RCS. You got location transpiring across RCS.
So are you working with WhatsApp and Apple, or are you looking to?
I'm talking to companies like that, yes. Because what we're finding is they have some automation, not those particularly, but the ones that we're talking to have like a 75% hit rate. And so far we're in the 90s. And so if we can do what they can do for the same price that they're doing it internally, then why wouldn't they, use us?
Well, they all have, big expansion plans in terms of engaging with brands. So I'm sure they're going to need a service like yours. But anyway, I have to leave it there because we've run out of time. But thank you so much for your time today, John, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.